Good morning. Today we come to the most familiar of all the APEST gifts. That's teaching. One of the strongest portraits of Jesus in the Gospels is that of a teacher. Other than the title Lord, people call Jesus teacher more often than any other name, and often with a great deal of respect and admiration. And Jesus also calls himself a teacher. Today, I want to help us think differently about teaching and to see the calling from other perspectives, helping us all to experience it as a multifaceted identity. Now, we all know what it's like to sit in a classroom where the second hand on the clock moves at the speed of ice melting in December. We've all lived through sermons that felt like life sentences. Now, I'm being dramatic, I know, but you know what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be this way. The church is worth more than monotone, unengaging monologues from the front. So much more. When Paul says teacher in his letters, he is most definitely not thinking of a professor in a bow tie. He's imagining disciples and a rabbi. Paul lived the faith as fast as his students could learn. He was a master of his content. He didn't need to whiteboard it, he just did it, and church exploded. But everyone doesn't learn in the same way. Some people learn by listening. So if they want to paint a room, for example, they ask someone what they need to do, how to do it, what supplies to get, how to use them, how to tell the job's been done properly. Others are visual learners. They read a book on painting. They check out colour charts, they watch some YouTube videos, they binge watch the HGTV channel and so on. And still others learn by doing. Now, they go to home base before they even know which room they're going to paint. They try, fail, retreat, then try again, and after 27 trips to home base, that room is painted and it's looking great. Now sure, the visual learner was finished a week ago, but this kind of learner has painting in their bones now. It's not knowledge, it's a skill. Great teaching engages all three approaches. Look at Jesus. He spoke, he read, he used illustrations and talked. He also walked and boated, he healed and prayed, modelling everything he intended his disciples and you and me to do. Of course we can learn about the ways of Jesus by reading and listening, but we live the ways of Jesus when we leave the classroom and actually do them. The goal of Jesus' teaching ministry, after all, is transformation through obedience. We're more than students, we're disciples, and our job is to follow the rabbi. Our goal is not merely to think differently, but to live differently. To see the teaching gift expressed in every domain of society, you look at financial planners, researchers, authors, corporate consultants, athletic coaches, journalists, acting coaches, and of course teachers and lecturers. Interestingly though, when combined with the other four gifts, different types of teachers emerge. First, we have the crisis creator. Now this is a shepherding teaching combination. His or her teaching style is to give the students enough instruction to get them into trouble. Now the downside is they don't have enough information to succeed. But the upside is that against all the odds, they do in fact succeed. They take everything they have done and seen and learned and experienced up to that point, and they use it to grow through the next challenge. Now this is a powerful form of teaching, and nothing helps us learn like a crisis. The shepherding teaching person cares for their students. They love their pupils and is all in with them. They believe in their pupils and it's how they lead them, and they leave them to get on without them. The shepherds allow the sheep to wander, and occasionally they just tap them to keep them from straying. The crisis creator teaches with love at the centre. Now the next type is the passion igniter, a teaching apostolic combination. The passion igniter is the kind of teacher that inspires you to be more than you ever imagined you could be. They help you see things in different ways and in ways that you never dreamt of before. They challenge you to be what you never imagined possible. They boil down words into a question that explodes your whole world. They walk a tightrope when they teach, creating dramatic tensions in their silences. The passion igniter exists to empty his or her heart into the minds of their students. Not for indulgence though. It's about awakening them to their dreams. The third type is the truth excavator. Now that's a combination of the evangelistic and teaching. The truth excavator believes that a teacher's job is to empty the classroom and get into the fields to do the work of discovery. Truth excavators help their students dig, not just into books, but into soil, into people, into contexts, into cultures and languages, economies and disciplines. Of course the truth excavator studies, but the study is to equip the journey. They're the Indiana Joneses of teaching, if you will. Now you remember Indy did teach in a classroom, but his passion was going into the dark places where secrets live and dragging them out into the light for everyone to see and enjoy. Next is the mentoring master, the teaching shepherding combination. Now, note the difference between the teaching shepherding combination and the earlier shepherding teaching combination of the crisis creator, where the shepherding impulse in the individual is stronger than the teaching. The mentoring master shares their life with their students. The only way to teach for them is to bring the student into their home, their life, their highs and lows, and just be open. Who the mentoring master is just as important as what they have to teach. This is the closest to the Jesus model, the rabbi. The mentoring master takes a student on and teaches as they live. Every meal is a lesson, every moment is an exam. It's about shaping character that can accomplish the task. The whole person is being taught all at once. They are a life-sharing courage and confidence builder. Finally, we have the memory maker, the prophetic teaching combination. Now, the memory maker has a mission to remind you of who you are. Now, we need more teachers like this, focused on helping us shape our Christian identity. We need to be around teachers who know the Father, both metaphorically and literally, so that they can remind us that we are children of the Father when we forget. The memory maker doesn't fill us with academia. Instead, they help us develop an active table of contents, of moments where we discover who we truly are and whose image we bear. There may be no more important teacher than this one. The memory maker's first connection is vertical, to God. They surf the horizontal, causing us to remember who made the waves and where the power comes from. They're mysterious and majestic, profound and perturbing. They get under our skin and they invite us to follow, showing us what we're made of, or better still, who we're made of. Now finally, the teaching impulse needs the other gifts to remain balanced. In many ways, teachers or teaching are similar to prophets and apostles in that they deal with ideas that shape life. The difference, perhaps, is that teachers are concerned more about broad comprehension and systematic understanding as opposed to faithfulness to the covenant, as is the prophetic impulse, or to the collection of more fundamental and foundational meta-ideas which interest the apostolic. Now, what teachers have taught you the most? What did they teach you? How did they teach you? Do you see them in one of these types? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you. Our example of the APEST gift of teaching in society is a fellow Scot and a personal favourite of my wife's. She's Judy Murray, OBE, sportswoman and tennis coach. The sheer scope of Judy's impact across a distinguished 30-year coaching career is impossible to quantify. A role model and global ambassador for women's tennis, Judy is a key influencer in coach learning, participation and player development. A former Scottish international tennis player, Judy started her coaching apprenticeship as a lone volunteer coach in her hometown of Dunblane. She rose quickly and was one of the first women to pass the Lawn Tennis Association Performance Coach Award, the highest level LTA qualification. She went on to become British Fed Cup team captain, and in her role as Scottish national coach, she was an instrumental figure in the development of numerous British number ones, including Jamie Baker, Elena Baltacha, Colin Fleming, Alan Macon, and of course the early careers of her sons Andy and Jamie. She's well known for her person-centred coaching and has been passionate about making tennis inclusive for everyone, whatever their background and no matter their ability. At the forefront of innovation, she has developed several highly successful tennis programmes which have helped raise the profile of female coaching and accelerated positive change for women's tennis at grassroots level and beyond. Judy has spent the last 8 years investing her own money and time into the starter tennis programme for girls, Miss Hits. It has now been delivered to tens of thousands of girls around the world, helping increase female participation in tennis. She's also shaped coach learning structure and influenced coach development opportunities in Britain and around the world. The She Rallies programme, developed with the Lawn Tennis Association, has created more opportunities for females to play tennis in the UK, while her Tennis on the Road programme is aimed at growing the coaching workforce that delivers tennis. In 2018, she launched the Judy Murray Foundation, the mission of which is to raise money to bring tennis into areas of Scotland that are not synonymous with tennis, such as rural and or disadvantaged inner city communities. In a recent interview, she said, "I understand the importance of sharing ideas, experiences and philosophies with others and across sports. The easiest and quickest way to become good at what you do is to work alongside people who have been there and done it. For the past few years, I have spent most of my time building tennis workforces around the world because I realised I could have a much longer term impact on tennis if I went back to grassroots and invested in others. Murray was appointed OBE in the 2017 Birthday Honours for services to tennis, women in sport and charity. So good morning and welcome everyone. Today I have with me Paul Brown and Paul's going to talk to us a bit about the whole teaching, gifting and the teaching impulse. But before we get into that, Paul, it's nice to see you. I wonder if you would mind just giving people a bit of history, a bit of background as to who you are and what you've been up to within the sort of the life of the church and more broadly maybe and what you've been up to in Plumline and things like that.
Sure. My wife Ruth and I have been around Plumline for a long time now, and we actually led Trinity Life Church in Royston for many years up until about 2011 when we handed over to Kate and Matt, who many of you probably know. And you might have seen us, we come up to HCC occasionally. Usually it's Ruth who stands up and does the teaching, but I usually tag along with her. Since handing over the church leadership, I went into school teaching. So I retrained as a maths teacher, and so I've been doing various jobs around that since. But obviously still involved in church in various ways. I'm involved with the Plumline trustees as well. So kind of keeping a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the network.
That's great, thank you. So as you know, we've been following a series over the last month and a half now, exploring the 5 Ephesians 4 giftings, and we've come today to the teaching one, which in many respects a lot of people will feel they're very, very familiar with because it's probably the one we see most often demonstrated. But in a nutshell, how would you define the role of the teaching gift? And what is it that excites you about that function, given that that's something that you're involved in?
Yeah, so in some ways, it's easiest to start off by defining what the teaching gift isn't. I recently came across this quote that the teaching gift is not necessarily preaching from a pulpit with a big black Bible. That's from Tim Anderson, who you probably know. And I think that's interesting because we sometimes have this misconception that when we say teaching in church, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about standing in the pulpit and preaching a sermon. But actually, I think it's so much wider than that. This series obviously is based out of Ephesians 4, and if you look there, what's the purpose of all of this? It says it's to prepare God's people to serve and ultimately to build us up to maturity. And more than anything, I think that's what the teaching gift is really about. So it's not about like filling people's heads with knowledge, but it's about equipping people, making people better able to follow Jesus, better disciples, more effective in their Christian life, and from that promoting unity within the body of Christ, within the church, and moving us all on to maturity. And verse 14, I think, talks about not being thrown backwards and forwards by every wind of doctrine or every kind of latest trendy teaching. But able to make those sound judgments. And for me, teaching, the essence of teaching is enabling other people to make those sound judgments and learn for themselves and not just pick up on the latest thing that's going around. And you kind of get a good view of different aspects of the teaching gift by obviously looking at Jesus' model. He did the big crowd teaching, by the crowd by the seashore that was so big that he had to get in the boat because they couldn't see him. And maybe he would have used a big black Bible if such a thing had existed then. But But he also spent a lot of time questioning people and being questioned by the the teachers of the law and by the ordinary people as well. He spent a lot of time, obviously, with his disciples, just sitting around talking with them, teaching them in a small group basis. More than anything, I guess he lived out the truth that he was teaching, and people learned by looking at his own life. He set an example for other people to follow.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you read on in Acts, Paul gives us some very similar model. He did a lot of preaching in the synagogues and the theatres, talking to the big crowds, but he also did a lot of teaching of people within the churches that he planted. He tended to go to a place and live there for years. And what was he doing? Well, he was teaching them. He was doing all the stuff that Jesus had done, living his life, mentoring people like Timothy. We see very clearly, and obviously teaching people by writing letters. And we're his students today in that context as well. So I think we want to take people deeper than just learning a list of facts. And classroom teaching actually, I think teaches us a lot about that. I can see a lot of parallels between what we do in the church and what we do in the school classroom. That if you focus just on learning a bunch of facts and set methods, you might get some students through the next exam, but actually to prepare them for life and further study, you need to go deeper than that and help them to understand how and why things work. And I think the same is very much true in the church setting, that we're not focused on I know how to interpret this scripture and you just need to learn it from me. Yeah. But we're focused on helping one another to understand and get to grips with truths and scripture and find the best way of living out different situations. I'm not actually at the moment doing very much formal teaching in a church context, so I don't very often preach on a Sunday, but I do seem to be asking a lot of kind of awkward questions in different contexts and helping people to tease out what's going on. And actually, that's all part of teaching as well, I think.
John Paul, that's so interesting to hear you say that, because the thing that struck me is, as we've been studying this whole topic and learning about teaching, is that there is no one way of doing this. There's so many ways, and as you say, Jesus is a great model for us in this one. So that excited me as someone who is involved in a bit of teaching. But likewise, what you've just said there, I think is so key. It's not always about being the one imparting the knowledge. It's sometimes the one asking the questions that gets others to the point of understanding and clarifying why they believe what they believe or what they think. So that's really encouraging. Thank you, Paul. We talked a bit about in the overview the different styles of learning. And I know sometimes there's debate around whether this is in fact true, but there's the visual learner, the kinetic learner, the auditory learner. I mean, as someone who teaches, and obviously in the classroom, that I guess is something you're constantly thinking about, but how do you adapt your teaching style to take on board the different ways that people learn?
Yeah, it is a very, very interesting topic of discussion, that, and in some senses it's quite current in the education world as well as in the church world. To what extent should we tailor what we do to individuals? I think in a classroom context, it's clear that you basically have to do a bit of everything, and I don't believe that each person has one way of learning. I think we're all a mixture. So some people will tend to learn better in one way, either auditory or kinesthetic or whatever labels you use for these things. So we all have our preference, but actually we all need a range of different styles. So in the classroom, I'm always trying to find a range of different practical things and visual things and spoken ways of teaching things, and the very same thing applies in church. Obviously, there's a limit to what you can do when you're standing up preaching on a Sunday morning, although actually you can vary that quite a lot. You can break it up by getting people to talk to their neighbour and things like that. And we can make it visual. We've all become much better recently at doing stuff with video and exciting things like that, but out of necessity. And maybe that's one of the good things we can take from this from this strange year that we've lived through so far.
Yeah.
But obviously in the wider church context, you know, there's much more scope for variety and mixing up those teaching styles. Yeah.
I think it's just encouraging for those people who might be sitting there thinking, well, you know, I couldn't stand up front and preach a sermon. It's more than that, and there's lots of ways we can bring our different sort of gifts to bear in this space. So that's really great. Thank you. So, look, Paul, you know, there might be individuals watching this morning or later on, and how did they recognise the teaching impulse in their lives? You know, what sort of steps, what sort of advice would you give them as someone who's gone on this journey to how they can develop this gift in themselves?
Well, in terms of recognising it, I think the first thing to recognise is that in a sense we all have this teaching gift and this teaching role to different degrees. So some people will obviously, that'll be their main thing, but in a sense we all have it because we're all in those situations where we're influencing people around us. But in terms of what does it look like? What does it feel like? I suppose it's characterized by a desire to understand the detail, to not just read a piece of scripture, but to want to really understand how it fits into the big picture, and what am I supposed to learn from this? So it's that desire of understanding for yourself, and linked with a desire to help other people do that for themselves, and to understand the things that you've learned as well. So it's that desire to pass stuff on. In terms of steps to take to develop this gifting within our own lives and within the church, I think, you know, we can start by looking at our own lives and reflect on the journey that you've come on since becoming a Christian. Whether that's a short journey or a long one, but hopefully you can see that things have changed. Your knowledge and your understanding and your ability to make sound judgments has changed. So you know, start by reflecting on what have been the influences. How have I learned from other people, and how can I apply that to pass that on to others. And then perhaps more widely in the church, we need to look for ways of making sure what we're doing is efficient and good. I came across a thing called the Great Teaching Toolkit Evidence Review, which was published earlier this year. It's actually a review of published evidence about what makes classroom teaching good, which was needed because there's just so much research and evidence out there. And these guys have done a fantastic job of pulling it together. And it is very school teaching focused. So it's a lot of the language is kind of edu-speak. It's kind of aimed at school. If you're a school teacher, I recommend you go find it and read it, because it's fantastic. If you're not a school teacher, you'll find you have to filter it quite a lot to take out the bits that are kind of curriculum specific and stuff like that. But what I was struck by when I read through that was that there's some real keys in there that we can take and apply almost directly to church. And one of those things, those bullet points, is having a deep and fluent knowledge and flexible understanding of the content you are teaching. So this is kind of the starting point. If we're going to help others and influence others and teach others, the first thing we need to do is to dig deep into the scripture for ourselves.
Pretty fundamental, that one, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And find respected teachers and kind of sit under their ministry and learn from them. And I just say not necessarily the most charismatic teachers, but the ones who you can rely on to be sensible and help us to understand. And also not just the ones who say stuff that you already agree with, but sometimes it's useful to kind of deliberately sit under some ministry from people that you don't naturally agree with, to help you understand whether you really do disagree with them, and to get a broader perspective. As an aside, I think that's one of the big dangers with social media in our world today, is that it tends to reinforce the stuff that you already believe in, and so we do need to be very aware of that, and so consciously going against that from time to time, I think is a useful thing. One of the other things from this great teaching toolkit is having a knowledge of common student misconceptions and sticking points. Again, it's a bit edu speak, but it's about getting to know the things that people tend to misinterpret and misapply, so that we can then come up with strategies and ways of helping people to understand things more clearly and put them in the context of the broader context of Scripture.
Right. So how is that working out in your life right now, I guess, is where we get to, you know, inside and outside the church. I mean, you've said at the moment you're not overly involved in teaching in the church, but you're still obviously fulfilling this role. So how is that working out for you?
Yes, so I'm not doing a lot of preaching at the moment, but obviously I'm involved in church life, in cell group, and being in small group meetings. I mean, one of the things that we're doing in Sunday morning meetings just at the moment is doing them on Zoom and having breakout rooms where you can actually get to talk with a small group of people, and you can learn from one another like that as well. So there's all those kind of contexts, and obviously we're all involved in those kind of situations. You might be involved in one-to-one discipling, or and we're all spending time with friends and neighbours and that kind of thing. So we've got all of those contexts in which this thing can be lived out. If I could go back to this great teaching toolkit again, on kind of what should we be doing and making space for it in our setting. Another thing it says is about promoting interactions with students based on mutual respect, care, empathy, and warmth. And so it's talking about, obviously in a classroom context, you've got to build that atmosphere of respect with people you don't know. Hopefully we know some of the people in our church already that we're working with, so we've already got that aspect. But this is a clear link, I think, with the kind of pastoral gifting, and the fact that real impartation and teaching comes out of healthy relationships, that we can't just swan in and kind of teach and then swan out again. Well, I mean, there are contexts in which we do, but the more effective stuff, I believe, comes through relationship, and engaging people and making it all interactive. And again, it says using concise, appropriate, engaging explanations, using examples and non-examples appropriately to help learners understand and build connections.
That's a mouthful.
which is a big mouthful, but it's about not just spouting the truth, but helping people to understand it with illustrations. And just thinking about Jesus, you know, he talked a lot about fishing in his examples and his stories and his parables, because that was the context in which he was. So he was relating the teaching that he was bringing to the situation and the context in which his audience were living. And we need to do the same again. For us, it probably isn't fishing on the lake that we would most naturally go to as an example, but understand where the other people are at, and using examples, using stories that are appropriate for them. I remember we've got friends who do teaching out in South Asia. And when they're doing stuff out in the sticks, going and teaching people, they don't put 3 bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. they'll do a lot of stuff with storyboards and picture boards and telling stories through pictures, because that's what communicates with those particular people. It's through pictures and stories, not through having a clearly structured set of bullet points. So it's all about understanding the audience and tailoring what we're doing. And the aim, of course, is deeper understanding, not just good words. How does this bit of truth fit in with everything else? And that's why we need to be building connections and helping learners to deeply understand stuff. And just pull out a couple more things.
Sure.
It says using questions and dialogue to promote elaboration and connected, flexible thinking amongst learners. So again, it's asking those awkward questions. It's questioning and dialogue, which in most church contexts is a good way of engaging people and helping people to learn, encouraging people to ask those questions for themselves. It's what Jesus did, and we need to do it too, to encourage people to learn by asking questions for themselves. And finally, from this list, helping students to plan, regulate, and monitor their own learning. Sorry, this is definitely a bit education speak, isn't it? But bear with us. Progressing appropriately from structured to more independent learning as students develop knowledge and expertise. And to my mind, this is the ultimate goal of teaching. It's to make yourself, the teacher, redundant. By getting students to learn for themselves, getting them to that place where they don't need you to show them how the scripture works, how these truths fit together, but they've learned to work that out for themselves and pass it on to other people. So I think there are a few lessons in there that we can hopefully use in the church context to make our teaching more effective and more efficient, perhaps, and get the most out of it, and focus on what's the ultimate goal, which is to equip the people we're teaching so that they can be effective disciples of Jesus. They can go off and teach other people the stuff that they've learned from us as well. And make ourselves redundant as teachers so that we can then move on and teach somebody else.
Paul, I mean, that's fascinating, and you're right. I mean, some of the language is maybe very school teachery, but I think there's some real wisdom in some of that stuff you've shared with us, for all of us to sort of take on board that we all have a role to play in this. Our lives are our example, and actually making ourselves redundant ultimately should be the goal in terms of this. Look, Paul, thank you so much for being with us this morning and for sharing your wisdom and insight. And I'm sure lots of good things will come from that. Thank you so much, Paul.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.